Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Anthony Salazar, and I'm the Postdoc Services Specialist for the College of the Environment. And I'm delighted to have you with us for a special session devoted to career development that we're calling Getting an Academic Position in a COVID Era, Stories from Recent Assistant Professors. I'd like to introduce our session's moderator, Dr. LuAnne Thompson, Professor of Oceanography. So LuAnne, please take it away.
Welcome everyone. And I want to make sure that we give the most time to the presenters and your questions. So I'm going to make this introduction short. It's a challenging time, something that I've been working on, or I worked on with a group of junior faculty, is thinking about the impacts of COVID when you're applying for jobs. So in terms of resume gaps and things like that. So that may be an additional topic that we could talk about at the end. But let's just go ahead and take it away and let each of the panelists introduce themselves briefly, and then we'll get into the Q&A, introduce themselves and talk about your journey towards the position that you currently have. So I'm just going to go in the order that I see you on the Zoom. So would you mind starting, Jessica? Jennifer, I'm sorry. Jennifer.
Sorry, I was like, do you mean me? That's another common 90s
Jennifer, yeah.
girl. Okay, hi, my name is Jennifer Hellmann. I am a first-year assistant professor at University of Dayton in the biology department. I study evolutionary biology and parental effects. So a bit of background, I got my PhD from Ohio State in 2016. I actually did my PhD with my spouse. We went into grad school together. I then did a 4-year postdoc at University of Illinois. So I was dealing with the two-body problem. My wife worked at Oberlin College for 2 years. And then during my postdoc, I was on the job market for 3 years. The first year, I'd say I didn't have too much success, had some Skype interviews, that was it. The second year, I had a lot of Zoom interviews. I had 2 on-campus interviews and 1 offer. I actually declined that offer because the offer came very late in the season. My wife had actually already accepted a job at Cal State Long Beach. And we didn't get offered a spousal position for either position. So the last year of my postdoc, we moved to Long Beach to start my wife's job. And then I went on the job market fall 2019. I applied to about 35 jobs, had 7 Zoom interviews, 5 on-campus interviews, kind of in a range of schools from Cornell to like Cal State Fullerton. I actually wound up only attending 3 of them because I got an offer at University of Dayton, and they offered my spouse a position here as well. And also, so I didn't go on the rest of my interviews. I was also newly pregnant at the time and felt really terrible and didn't think I could do some back-to-back interviews, if I'm being honest. So I actually signed my contract like maybe 2 days before everything shut down, and they rescinded all the contracts. So I got in right under the wire. And then I started my job in August and had a baby in mid-September, which, again, there's no good time to have a baby, but it worked out okay. And then went on leave for 6 weeks. And then I've been working and setting up my lab this year, which has definitely been a bit challenging in COVID in terms of just delays in shipping and just kind of generally being a little bit stressful for everybody. But I'd say, for me, we solved the two-body problem. And my wife is being offered a permanent position this year. She came in with a 2-year and now is being offered. So it is possible. It was a little heartbreaking to have to turn down my first offer at a school that I really liked. But it did all work out for us in the end.
Great. Okay, how about Morgan?
Hi, I'm Morgan Levy. I'm also a first-year assistant professor, and I'm at the University of California, San Diego. And I actually have a joint appointment between the Scripps Institution of Oceanography and the School of Policy there. So if anyone has questions about joint appointments, I'm happy to take questions on that. So I started in July 2020, and I'm just very briefly a water resources hydrology person. And the quick rundown of what my job market process was that I graduated off cycle in December of 2016. I then postdoced for 1 year at my PhD institution, which was UC Berkeley, and then postdoced for 2 more years at UC San Diego, where I currently am. And the reason for that is my husband got a faculty job at UCSD prior to me going on the job market here. So I did ultimately get my current job at the same place as my previous postdoc, so here at UCSD. I have a 2-year-old, she's 2 now next week. I was around 6 months pregnant when I first started applying for and interviewing for jobs. She was 1 year old by the time I got my job. And I also interviewed before and during the COVID shutdowns. So I did interviews in person as well as virtually. And again, I do have an academic spouse. He did get his academic position 3 years before I went on the market. So my market was in many ways, and maybe similar to Jen, tailored to my partner by way of being second in line. And so my specific timeline was, roughly between 2016 and 2018 academic years. I applied to miscellaneous postdoc fellowships, a handful of research and faculty jobs at the UCs and the California state system, because that's where I was living and I wanted to stay with my partner. I was never awarded a fellowship. I never got called back by any of those jobs. In the 2018 to 2019 academic year, I did a very limited search. I applied to 2 jobs. I got 1 campus interview when I was between 7 and 8 months pregnant. Never heard from either of them. 2019, 2020, again, this time I did the full market. I applied to about 40 jobs, and I got 8 video interviews. So those initial video interviews, 4 campus interviews ultimately, the final one of which was moved from in-person to online because it was smack in the middle of COVID. That is how I ultimately got my job. But basically, the one offer I ultimately got out of those 4 campus interviews is not the institution that I ended up at. I got an outside offer. We were able to then negotiate through the spousal process a position for me at my current institution, which is where my husband is. And the only reason that happened is because I got an outside job offer through the formal job market process. So the specific things I can speak to, if folks have questions, are like Jen, 2-body problems, the spousal hire process, and asynchronous job searches. Also can empathize and speak to failed job searches, the experience of applying to jobs and never being called back, or interviewing for jobs and never being called back, which is the vast majority of my experience on the job market. Being pregnant, also having an infant and dealing with breastfeeding and pumping while interviewing for jobs, doing both in-person and virtual interviews, strategies I ultimately came upon for interview prep, dealing with loss of childcare during COVID, both as a postdoc and as a new assistant professor. And then finally, I don't know if people are at this point, but just the job negotiation process, and specifically the negotiation process during COVID. So there's, during COVID, like I think Jen touched on this, there's some novel financial and time pressure situations that universities faced and are facing that really alter the traditional power dynamics that can happen during the negotiation process. So it's sort of, you're sort of thrown into a situation where none of your advisors actually have sort of an understanding of the dynamics of the situation that you're going to face if and when you're on the market. So it's a tricky period, and I have a lot of empathy for anyone and everyone who's actually attempting to go for an academic job right now. Anyhow, to the extent I can answer questions on those, I will. But thank you for having me here.
We already have one question about the dual career, but I'm going to hold that until we go through the rest of the opening remarks. So we'll go to Mauricio I. Next.
Hey, thanks, LuAnne, and hello, everybody. My name is Mauricio Ibañez-Mejia. I'm a first-year assistant professor at the Department of Geoscience at the University of Arizona. Although prior to this position, I spent 4 years as a tenure track assistant professor at the Department of Earth and Environmental Sciences at the University of Rochester. So I graduated actually from this department. I got my PhD at the University of Arizona in 2014. Then I moved for a 2-year postdoc at MIT, where I was a Crosby fellow. And in 2016, I moved to University of Rochester. My path, although it seems kind of be like a bit circuitous to come back to Arizona, I had I guess a pretty unique experience like for applying and like in the job market. And which I guess it's like being at the right place at the right time. So as I was finishing my PhD here in Arizona, like I sent 2 faculty applications, 1 postdoc fellowship. I got offered the postdoc fellowship and 1 faculty job. And then as I was, in my 4th year at University of Rochester, the position in Arizona opened, and so I sent an application and ended up making it back. I was ready to fly to Tucson for the interview when things shut down in March. So basically, like things shut down like the week before I was getting ready to travel. So I was like, it was unclear whether the search was going to be, was going to continue or was going to be stopped. So they ended up deciding to continue. And then I was like, okay, like we need you that, like in 3 days from now, send us like get on Panopto and like record your talks, like had to give 2 seminar style talks and like record your talks and like send them over. And like this, like I had never heard of Panopto or Zoom ever before. So it was kind of a hectic few days, just trying to learn, how to get everything, like working and like record it, sent over. Things ended up working well. It was tricky, as Morgan was just saying. The negotiations for a position during COVID times were very different from negotiating a position pre-COVID in many different ways. So like happy to talk about that. During my time at University of Rochester, I co-chaired a couple of search committees. And like very recently, we finished another search here at University of Arizona. Like that was all like, COVID, during COVID times, like online based. So I'm happy to chat about that as well. Like, kind of some of the experiences from like a search committee or like faculty perspective on like what things were effective, what things were maybe not as effective, and like things to keep an eye on. And what else? And then, so like lab wise, like I had the fortune that I had a working lab at University of Rochester already, like before the pandemic. And like it was a little stressful negotiating, like changing institutions in the middle of COVID with all the uncertainties, and like basically leave kind of a secure job in a place where like, I really, really like my job to just, like for this like COVID uncertainty. So because I'm getting up the lab up to speed in Arizona has been slow, much slower than anticipated. So there's some challenges to that for those of us that do research that is heavily lab based. So yeah, I think that's all that I can say for now, and like happy to answer questions later on.
Samer, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, LuAnne. I'm Samer Naif. I'm also a first-year assistant professor. I'm at Georgia Institute of Technology in Atlanta. So my career path getting here, I grew up in San Diego and just so happened ended up transferring to UCSD, and then for a bachelor's, and then to Scripps Institution of Oceanography for my PhD. I got that in 2015. And then I happened to land a fellowship at Lamont Doherty Earth Observatory, which is similar to Scripps, but at part of Columbia University. That was a 3-year postdoc. That the nice thing about their setup there is they do tend to become pipelines into soft money researcher positions, which there they call assistant research professors. Which basically means I don't teach, but I have to raise my salary through part of my salary through grants. And ended up getting that position basically because I got a proposal funded, and so was able to use that to get a offer from, kind of lucked out, basically got one interview, and then that did turn into an offer at a university. And since I had a funded project, Lamont definitely didn't want to let me go. And because I also have a two-body problem, so my partner, she's also academic researcher, I ended up staying at Lamont because it was easier for us, since she was still living in San Diego, finishing up her PhD. And after that, even though I got this great job, which, you know, I very much like Lamont, still do, and would have liked to stay there, my main goal really was to solve our two-body problem and find positions together. So I stayed on the job market, even though I had just gotten that position. And that's when Georgia Tech opened up. And so I applied to that pretty long ago now. It feels like a different era. That was in 2018 that I applied for that, and then ended up interviewing the spring or early, actually more like winter 2019. And so this was well before any of the COVID stuff popped up, but it was such a slow negotiation process. And I also wanted to not start immediately that year, that it gave us time to figure out the two-body problem. And Georgia Tech was able to accommodate by giving my spouse 3 years of researcher funding. So technically it will still potentially become a two-body problem again. But so my real experience with COVID side of things is really moving during COVID and trying to establish a lab. I should say my area of specialization, in case I forgot, is marine geophysics. So most of what I do is, when I can, go out to sea to collect data. So these are pretty involved, labor-intensive, logistics-intensive projects, and then spend the rest of the time essentially doing data analysis in my office. So because of that, I had happened to be lucky enough that I got a few projects going, and we collected the data set essentially the year before COVID. And so I was able to continue working, but trying to set up a new lab, especially with how to spend startup money and potential complications with fear that the startup money will somehow magically disappear or things like that because of budget concerns. And really just, I must say it was a very slow process for me to readjust. And I think I still kind of am. I don't really feel like I've started a new job yet. So I can help with any questions, basically what it's like to get up and running and dealing with the two-body problem and all those things associated with COVID. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Great. Okay, Mauricio C., we hear from you, and then we'll get back, and there's lots of interest, I think, in the two-body problem. We'll get back to that in a minute.
Right. Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here, to meet you all virtually. My name is Mauricio Cantor. Thanks for the opportunity to chat about these job prospects during these extraordinary times that we are living. First of all, I hope you're all safe and healthy, and if I can be any help towards this journey to get a position that makes sense for all of you. So starting with the basics, I'm a marine biologist, behavioral ecologist, and my research is mostly concerned to understand how animals interact with each other and how that shaped their lives. And among my colleagues here, it looks like I'm the most junior of all of them. So I'm currently still a postdoc. I'm at the Max Planck Institute in Germany. And I'm here after getting my other degrees in Brazil and Canada. And I'm soon to be assistant professor at the Oregon State University. If everything goes well, then I should start there in September. But one thing that I learned during the pandemic is my plans are much more flexible now. So I don't know how this is going to play out. So I've been on a job market, actually actively searching for a position since mid-2019. I was lucky to be interviewed or to get 2 or 3 online interviews before. I think I applied to a total of about 15 jobs. And then in 2019, back then when interviews were still in campus, I was lucky to be shortlisted for a position that I really wanted. So I did the full process in campus, in person. And yeah, as an introvert interviewing for my dream job, that was quite of an experience. I was feeling very honored, but also I never felt that anxious in my entire life during the 2 months preparing for that interview. I ended up not getting that job, but I had lots of fun with the interview during the process. I learned a lot. I learned a lot about the process and also about myself. And yeah, one of the things that I thought I had learned at the time that preparation was everything. But then comes the pandemic, and then changes everything, changed the game. It affected my life, our lives in many ways, and job search included, of course. And then in the beginning of 2020, I applied for 2 other jobs, which I got, I was shortlisted, and at some point, both of the jobs got canceled due to budget cuts. Then in exactly a year ago, I interviewed for this current position at Oregon State University, which ended up at the very beginning of the shutdown, and turned out to be just a very good fit, like being in the right place at the right time. And that's when I realized that pretty much everything I have learned about, job interviews and job talk and chalk talk, all of that stuff changed completely. So I did my interview entirely online, from the application to the in-campus visit to the negotiation of salary and benefits to signing the contract. And in fact, I have never been there to visit the campus yet because of the travel restrictions. So I guess most of my experiences on a job on the market has been during the pandemic era. So yeah, right now we're all experts in working with Zoom and everything, but at the time everything was quite new for me. So I'll be happy to talk about the pros and cons of the online interview. And yeah, so yeah, overall, thanks for having me. And
So we have a couple of questions already in the Q&A within Zoom. And there was interest in the two-body problem. And I think both Morgan and Jenn had a few words about that. I went through this a number of years ago. We were in the same field, so everyone knew we were a couple, which also made it kind of interesting, as opposed to interviewing when you're in maybe a slightly different field. So it's not clear whether you have a spousal situation from day one. And it's interesting that some of my experiences are relevant to what you're saying here. But do Morgan or Jenn want to expand a little bit on, or any of you, on your thoughts about interviewing with, hoping to find academic positions for both members of the partnership? Go ahead, Jenn.
Yeah, so yeah, we were in a weird position that, I turned down a job offer because my wife had already gotten a job offer, and they were very clear that there was going to be no spousal position with her offer. So Long Beach is a little bit south of LA, so there's lots of schools around that area. And so the plan was for me to still apply widely while she started her first year, but obviously with hope that we would stay in her position. And I wound up actually getting an on-campus interview at a school where we could have had 2 positions, and I didn't get that job. But I got my offer at University of Dayton, and it kind of wound up being perfect because they were looking for someone to start an ethics initiative there. She's in philosophy. And so they gave her a 2-year position, which when you already have a tenure track position isn't super great. But they gave us a lot of assurances that it was just because of, like, they can't come up with a tenure track position right away, and that they had every intention of moving forward with a tenure track position. And so we had this really hard conversation where it's like, do I give up another tenure track offer? Do we stay in Long Beach? I have no job there right now. I'm also having a baby. It's going to make it really hard to have any sort of position there next year. Or do we move and she gives up her tenure track job for something that might turn into a tenure track job and then might not? And, everybody has different ways that they have to make that decision. For us, it came down to, we felt like our job prospects together were better moving to University of Dayton. I think we both felt that those were 2 better jobs long-term. We also felt that if for some reason her job at University of Dayton didn't work out, we could live on one salary in Ohio. We couldn't do that in near Los Angeles. But it was a difficult decision. I think we made the right decision, but especially given COVID, there's probably no way that I would have been able to work. I mean, obviously also having kids puts you in this constrained position where you can no longer really be apart, or for most people, you can no longer really be apart. Like we were apart for 2 years during a postdoc, and that was not pleasant, but it was okay. But once we have a kid, it's not really feasible anymore.
So Morgan, do you want to add to that, or and Samer?
Yeah, I'm happy to. I know that I just actually answered a question, and the one that was originally posed to Jen about negotiating the appointments for the spouses. And I think this is tricky in an interview capacity because different people have different ideas about what you should and shouldn't say on when you're on your interview and at what point in the interview you should bring it up. And I was advised not to bring it up to the extent that I could. And that was because I did have an academic spouse. And after having gone through the interviews, I actually do think that it can really only work to the disadvantage of you on an interview if you have an academic spouse and if you're sort of forced to bring it up or you choose to disclose that. Because if you do have an academic spouse, you are harder to hire. And if you are just their shining first choice, it might not matter. But I actually felt like within the context of COVID, when universities are strapped, it became a pretty severe disadvantage, because at that point, and maybe, I don't know if this is still true this year, I think it was true during my situation where it was universities were put in this place where they sort of like needed to hire or lose the slot. And you really risk losing your second choice option if you choose someone who you're going to try and make a spousal offer to, and the spousal offer doesn't work. So I do think, like, my personal opinion, it might not be right for everybody, is to not say anything for as long as you possibly can. And unfortunately, they're not supposed to ask you. That's against all policies. They're not supposed to ask you about your personal life and who you're married to and what they do. Universally across the board, every in-person interview I had, I was asked. And I was asked in a way where it was like in a coffee shop or like at the dinner. You know, it was never in the formal setting. It was always in the informal parts of the interview, which are otherwise very valuable because you get to know people and ask questions and stuff. But they always found a way, and I was really uncomfortable not answering them, so I answered them. And I think the only specific advice I have there is that when and if you are on an interview, expect to be asked, even if it's against the rules. And also have an answer. If you don't want to ask, like after the fact, I formulated this answer where, you know, I would have had a canned answer that was, you know, out of respect for my friends and colleagues who, you know, have academic spouses or do not have academic spouses, you know, I'm actually going to decline to answer that question. And I think just have something that you're comfortable saying and practice it, and then say it when they ask you, because they will ask you. I think another part of the complication was that I maybe was asked more than other people, because at one point I was pregnant, and then I always, during my in-person interviews, had to ask for breastfeeding pumping breaks. And the second you ask for breastfeeding pumping breaks, everyone knows you have a baby, and then they know you have a partner, and they ask you what your partner does. So there's a huge disadvantage there in terms of if you're a woman and you have a child, you sort of are forced to reveal some personal information. This is a very interesting thing, I think, about what happened with COVID and the video interviews. I am a huge fan of video interviews, because in video interviews, you do not have to do any of these impersonal, informal exchanges for the initial, for the part of this where they're deciding who you are and whether or not you're a good fit on your merits. And everything's on video, so it's all kind of ostensibly recordable. So no one's asking you personal information. So the one offer I did ultimately get, even though I was told later that I was sort of number one or number two for several places, was the interview that I ultimately did virtually. And it was the only one where I was not forced to disclose that I had an academic spouse. So I don't know if that's just chance, but I do think that there's some massive benefits to women for the online virtual interview process, in that if I have an infant, if I'm breastfeeding, if I'm pregnant, you can't see that. So I really think if you can mask your ask, it sounds so shady, but if you can mask the fact that you have an academic partner for as long as you can, I think that's to your advantage, particularly if you're a woman. If you do not have an academic spouse, go for it. Like, they don't care. They only care if you're making their job harder. And now that I've been at my own university for a year, I have seen a couple hires go through, and the burden of figuring out someone's academic spouse and whether or not they fit and you can hire them is real. It's not hypothetical. It's hard to find a home for someone's spouse. And I think it's, that's the reality of it. So sorry to be negative in any way.
Yeah, I think, do you have a short comment, Samer? And then I want to transition to preparing for the interviews. There's a couple of questions about that.
Yeah, I'll be really brief, actually. I think Morgan captured a lot of things that were pretty eye-opening to hear, actually, because I can say that as a male, I did not feel that I was asked that question even indirectly, and I'm a little taken aback that you were, because it's not just like a suggestion. It's by law, they are not allowed to ask you that or even insinuate that question. And so I would urge others to also, in a nice way, respond where, that kind of behavior is not okay, because it is a disadvantage. In my case, I did say up front, but not during the interview. It was when I was applying, and it was specific to my circumstances, which is my partner is still a PhD student just about to defend, and I had just gotten an assistant research soft money job. So it wasn't like I was eager to get back on the market. I just finally got some relief for the next few years. And so I didn't want to waste time on that. I would rather develop my CV. And so I was pretty upfront with the places I decided to apply to, that I said, hey, I have this issue and I'm being upfront about it for these reasons. Otherwise, yeah, no need to say it, and they should not be asking about it. It is a disadvantage. They have to find money to accommodate that, and they don't want to do that.
Okay, let's transition. I just have to make one comment. When I was interviewing at UW, I got asked what my plans for children were. And that was easy to say, you cannot ask that. And then I went to the chair of the department and said, you have to tell people they cannot ask that, which he bristled at. But that was so obviously wrong that it was easy to address that. Okay, so I want to transition to thinking about preparing for the interviews, and also how you connect with people. Somebody put in something about building connections in your department, but it's also building connections at conferences and things that can actually help when you walk into the interview, if you've actually had interactions with people, seen people speak, etc. So if there's someone that would like to address that aspect of the preparation, both in COVID and not in COVID, and how much information you got ahead of time. So it's kind of broad, but anyone would like to address that? Or I'll call on you. Mauricio C, did you want to say something? Or, oh, Mauricio I just unmuted himself. Go ahead.
Yeah, I guess so, since I just added a quick answer to that question. So something that I would recommend that and this is online and not online, something that I found that's really effective, and I've seen it kind of from the other side that is really effective, is just really study the structure of the department you're visiting. I think if you're going to commit yourself to go to a department, you want to first of all want to know ahead of time what you are potentially getting into, and make sure what's your fit in the department, and what are the other people doing. I think that this will really helps with having fluid conversations, and conversations that are kind of move along more easily, especially we're online, it's just easier to kind of interactions are a little bit more difficult sometimes, and a little bit more of awkward silences, and just knowing the the structure of the department, the research that the potential faculty that you're going to be meeting with, work on what potential linkages there are to your own research, and how can you see like interacting with those, like if they're going to be your colleagues, like, how can you foresee like those interactions, both in terms of, science, research interest and things like that. I think that that's really, really valuable. And a candidate that that knows the research of the department, knows the structure of the department, I think it really stands out when like interviewees are coming in. And I like being like having, and like sometimes like, you have like small things that, like they miss, like you see a candidate that is talking about the, the department and like names the name of the department wrong or the name of the university wrong. Like you don't want to be there, right? Because like that immediately, like creates like, despite, like your qualification, like kind of gives the impression that like, okay, maybe this person is not as invested in learning about the department and like how this person can fit in here as like you like could expect. So like just be mindful of those little things, and like that can go a long ways into like making a good impression in terms of like your potential fit into the department.
Yeah. Anyone want to add on that, on connecting, how to connect in this online world, at least for the near future?
Yeah, I just want to second everything that Mauricio said, but also one piece of advice that people gave to me and I found extremely useful was during the interviews, online or not, to have lots of questions ready, like beyond studying what the faculty does, what the department does, how you fit over there, but also like be just genuine interested in their research. I mean, those could be your future colleagues. So yeah, just have lots of questions about their work, about, even if you repeat the same questions over and over again, always have lots of questions. I ended up memorizing a bunch of them. It was good. It was a bit awkward at some point, but it's better than just the silence. And the second piece of advice that people gave to me, and I also found very hard to do, but very, very useful, was to go to the interviews with the purpose of actually enjoying it, actually having fun. It could be like you have everything to have for this to be a intellectually stimulating conversation. So it's just like, usually interesting people, they're interested in you and your work. So that should be the primary mindset for the interviews.
Any other piece of advice for preparing for interviews in the online world or in person?
I have for the online stuff, I'll enter a written response in the Q&A, but I did ultimately end up with like a template that I used, because a lot of the questions ended up being really similar across the institutions. Like they all use sort of the same questions. So I had this template that I filled out before each of the video interviews, and I didn't do it for the first ones, but I was doing it for the final ones because I was just learning along the way. And I got better and better at it, but it's partly just, having, obviously, like not reading it during your interview, but like having gone through the process of having filled it out sort of gets you prepared to do those online interviews. Because the issue with the online interviews is at least the first round ones, is that they're really short. So you have to have pretty concise answers to questions. They're time limited, so you can't sort of ramble. So it's really helpful to have gone through the process of like writing out the points that I wanted to say. And the nice thing about video interviews too, if they're for the first round or if they're even for the final one, is, you can even have that sheet or a second screen or whatever it is in front of you during the interview. And again, like, please don't read them because you can see when people are reading, but like you can glance over and get reminded. So it's sort of like you can have note cards almost for your interview. So it, for people that stress about preparation, and I'm one of them, it can be sort of a stress relief to be able to have that during the video interviews. And I would recommend doing that because it's, it's an opportunity you have in the video interview environment that you don't have on in-person interviews.
Yeah.
I would add to that yeah, I filled out basically a list that I had pulled online of all these questions I read that people got asked, and I wrote out an answer to all of them just so that I had, and then I would look at that before the interview just so I knew I had a response. And I kept a document So I think I went on 12 Zoom interviews, and I kept a document of every single question that every single school asked me. And a lot of them do ask the same questions. And I interviewed at liberal arts colleges all the way to R1s. And I felt that that was really helpful for me. I'm happy to share that document. And I do want to add to what Mauricio said, that I think you have to be really excited about the school and like convince yourself that you're excited about and you want to be there to do well in the interview. Like, I think it's really hard to fake it till you make it. Like, I found it really tough to feel like I was interviewing well for schools where I didn't really want the job. And so someone asked about casting a wide net. And I think there is some benefit to getting some sort of interview experience. But if you think that you really don't want the job, I honestly felt like in schools where I really just was not interested, it wasn't really worth my time in the end, even when I got an interview, because I just didn't do well in the Zoom interview. And maybe other people have different experiences, but I was just not able to, I guess, muster enough enthusiasm to, it was noticeable, I think.
So any other comments? Oh, go ahead, Samer.
Yeah, it's a very brief comment. It's interesting to hear that from Jennifer, because, and then I had to remind myself it's COVID and so that the interviews are online, because I did apply to places that, geographically speaking, I was very hesitant to think that I would go there or want to live in those places, right? But then when I went and interviewed, oftentimes, regardless of the details of the job, was pleasantly surprised that, oh, actually, I could totally make my life fit here. And so post-COVID, when you can potentially go in person again, I would keep that in mind, as you never really know until you visit. I think online, though, that's a different story. Whatever you already think, you're not going to get any input, or you're not going to get the experience to know if it works for you.
So Mauricio, were you, this is part of the, the part of the conversation about how wide of a net to cast. I see, but did you want to add something here?
Yeah, I was actually writing a response to it. I guess that's like, there's like various approaches, right? Like you can, like, especially now, like when there's, with the scarcity sometime of jobs, I can understand like the appeal of sending multiple applications. But in my view, like what I recommend to my own students and postdocs is that like departments tend to be so unique, and like, the things and the specific, kind of like both like research and teaching, kind of angles that they're looking for in new faculty can be so unique that, like if you have the same application and you send it over and over again, that is very likely to be unsuccessful. And I think like to write a successful application, you have to spend the time to, like go through, the faculty profiles, see what the people are doing, like how is the, like the ad written, and like what that kind of tells you about, like where, like the research directions in which the department might be thinking about going, if that's not being like made explicit, and like think about like how you fit that, not just necessarily the department as it is today, but directions in which you can help the department grow, and like you can help like other faculty complement their research and like grow the, kind of the program. And like that applies both to research and teaching, right? Sometimes they have very specific teaching needs and sometimes they don't. So you also want to go into, like the course offerings and like look into like through the course catalog and like see what can you teach, what can you bring in terms of like training of students that is currently not available, and things like that. So and that takes a significant amount of time. So like if you're doing it for many applications in that level of detail, that's just going to take you away from like, writing one more paper or like getting, like and like things like that. Just keep making progress on your research. So my advice would be to like first, like, like it is good to have research, so interview experience, but also, make sure that you like invest the time, like especially if it's your dream job, is like you really want to make sure that you work your application in a way in which you show like that you're the best candidate for the job, both teaching and research wise. I think sometimes we forget the teaching, like you're so involved in research that we tend to forget that you also have to have a coherent teaching plan, and I think that's super important.
Yeah. Jen, was there something you wanted to add to this? I know you're typing right now.
Oh, yeah. I mean, so I applied to a lot of jobs. And partially for me, I mean, I agree that I think the jobs that you really want, you should definitely spend a lot of time specializing. But I will say I got interviews at places where I didn't specialize my application at all, really. And I got interviews at places where I spent a lot of time specializing. And so I do think there's some inherent, like, you're going to do better overall if you specialize, but there's a lot of variation to which the committee may or may not read that closely before you get to the Skype interview stage. And then how you do at the Skype interview stage might be really important. But for me, I partially cast my net really wide because I knew I had a 2-body problem. And I knew that at least the second year, I had to turn down a job offer because they didn't have a spousal hire. And like my wife didn't get a spousal hire position. And so I knew that getting a job offer in my case might not be sufficient, because like I might need to get multiple job offers to get one school that's willing to hire both of us. And for me, I felt like it was worth trying to cast the net as widely as possible to maximize the chance that we would get 2 offers. And I totally know that that's not feasible for everybody. But that was partially what I did, at least.
So we can move on to the next question in the chat was, did you ever face someone who was openly antagonistic about your work, about you or your work? I've seen this happen with emeritus professors, and how do you respond? And I think there's sort of another thought on that is often, when departments craft a job search, there is differences of opinion even after the advertisement is put out about what people are looking for. So there's sort of hidden expectations that you may not be aware of about what different parts of the department want. So you're kind of walking in blind in a sense, even though the application might be very clear. So it's sort of just a commentary, and then thinking about how you react to people during the interview process that are unpleasant or difficult. Any question? Morgan, do you want to get started?
I never had something like that happen. People were really kind and generous and interested, and I just had an overwhelmingly really positive experience when it came to research, actually. But I don't know if that's just my field or not. So yeah, I just wanted to say that at least to the extent that this stuff was going on, it was behind the doors. They didn't do it to me during an interview. Again, having now had a year where I've sort of seen some search processes go on, I've seen people be very negative about interviewed candidates behind closed doors, and very kind to their face. So I don't think that it didn't happen to me. I just think they didn't do it to my face. And bless them for not doing that. So.
Any other thoughts on that one?
I haven't necessarily experienced that ever during an interview, and that does sound kind of strange. Usually the incentive or the drivers behind that is they want their candidate to get the job, and you can do that much more effectively behind scenes than to confront you. But if you are, I have had interesting interactions just giving seminars, and what I would say is do your best on your feet to ignore the body language and the tone. Because that's also personal perception. And there's a lot of interesting characters in academia, as I'm sure you're all aware of. And just people just have weird ways sometimes of expressing themselves. So the best bet is to hone in on what they're saying and try to understand their question and just address it professionally. And so if that means you have to defend your work, well, do that as if you were responding to a review, right? You always want to be respectful, but on the grounds of the facts and your experience, respond to it. And I think you'll be okay.
So I think we can get at the broader, come back to the broader issue of how to prepare for the interviews when you do or don't have questions ahead of time. I know in the short pre-interview video interviews, you often do have the questions ahead of time, but What is the best way to prepare for both the short pre-screening interviews and the longer interviews? We haven't heard as much from Mauricio C. Did you want to talk about your experiences in terms of preparation and answering some of those canned questions if you had that experience?
Yes. So yeah. Well, I had maybe 2 interviews in person, so that was quite new to me. And I think it was Morgan was saying before that these are the kind of experiences that your advisors and mentors can help you the most with. So I got a lot of support from my current lab members and my supervisors on how to prepare for the classic interviews, kinds of questions, how to prepare a job talk and all of that. So that was really good. But then when it came to the online interview, everything was new for everyone. So what surprised me the most was having the questions beforehand to prepare. So at the beginning, I thought that would be a bit tricky because since you have a week to prepare, you kind of feel pressure to have the best possible answer. But I think at the end, it was really positive for me for just having more time to think through what I really wanted to say and prepare a little bit. I would say that I think it was also Morgan saying that you can have a second screen with your notes over there. That helps a lot. So I think overall, having the time to think through your answers and for all of those questions and make sure you actually answer them and write them down is really, really positive from the online interview. Yeah.
So we have about 10 minutes left, and I think that this is a good question to end. And if some of you would like to just comment on this, thinking about your postdoctoral experience, what do you think really helped you to get where you are? Did you focus on securing funding to strengthen your CV? I don't know, did you take advantage of opportunities to teach or mentor? What is it that that they could really think about now in terms of improving the experience, so when they actually do get the interview, they'll be able to sell themselves better, or how to sort of improve their CV? Anyone want to start, or I'll just call on you? Mauricio I, do you have any thoughts about that? About what to do as a postdoc to prepare you for the gauntlet?
I think what's interesting about, so when you're finishing your PhD, you feel like, oh, I'm so busy, have so many things to do. And because you're writing your dissertation, then you get into your, postdoc, and then it just feels busier. And then you think oh, when I land the job, it's going to be so much better. Right. And then you start and you realize that there's so many things that you kind of have to do simultaneously. I think during the postdoc, I found that starting to learn how to kind of keep these, not necessarily just focus on papers and research, not just focus on proposals and but kind of start to multitask in all these fronts that you're supposed to perform when you are, an assistant professor. When you go up for tenure, they're going to judge you not just based on your publications. It's going to be your publications, your teaching, your funding, your service. So I think it's a good opportunity to start, kind of getting a broader view, not just, as when you're a grad student that you're focusing mostly on your research, but get a broader view of what are the different things that search committees and departments are going to be looking for. And then work on those. So just to be more specific, I think starting to work on proposals and getting funding as some of the written responses from I think both Jennifer, Samer, and Morgan all have emphasized just writing proposals is key for sure. But you can't the search committees are also going to be looking at publications and first author publications. So just make sure that you keep those publications going at the same time as you start looking for ways to support your research. If you can get both of those, I think that will make you a very successful candidate.
Anyone want to add anything else to that? Great advice.
I wanted to actually echo what Morgan wrote, which is that it really is in the end ultimately luck and timing. And what I mean by that is, as long as you're working hard, you're doing pretty much what everyone else is doing, which is preparing yourself to be really competitive in the job market. But really, in the end, what it's all about is how long can you manage to stay in that position until it works out for you. So as long as you're getting interviews, I would say that you're doing things well. But turning the interview into a job is where it's just kind of whether the stars are aligning or not for you. So if you're not getting interviews, then that should help you focus on what you need to spend your time on, which is trying to make you stand out on paper. And that doesn't really mean only your CV. It really does mean your research statement and your cover letter. Because I know many colleagues who I was shocked to learn got jobs, which I was super happy about, of course, for them. But like before they even defended, and I was just like, how did you even pull that off, right? And it goes to show that it really happens to be coincidence. Are you exactly what that department is looking for? And then you happen to apply and they recognize that, and then you get the interview. So it's try to last as long as you can while you're doing your good work.
Okay,
during COVID, it might be longer than we had to wait also,
Exactly.
unfortunately.
Yeah. So there is a survey in the chat that they would love for you to answer, just give some feedback. I do have one more question that maybe we could answer, or you could answer the question about that I just posed. One question was, when you think about what the next step is, if you've been a postdoc and can be in a research scientist position, does that disadvantage or advantage your applications going forward, or in particular, the years since PhD? Do you think that there's a bias against more years since PhD versus fewer years since PhD? I think that equation is going to change right now because so many job searches were canceled last year. So I think we can expect that people will anticipate longer postdocs over the next 3 to 5 years. But any thoughts on that?
Pretty field specific too. It really varies across different fields. My impression in like the interdisciplinary climate and environmental sciences is just there's a lot of flexibility, and it's sort of whatever, if you really, really want an academic job, whatever allows you kind of like financially and locationally to like have a position that pays you enough to keep you in a place where you can continue to apply to academic jobs seems like totally reasonable. And I think everyone understands the circumstances with COVID, especially if you have family members that were affected by it or have young children, stuff like that. Seems pretty flexible to me from my perspective at this point, if you can financially afford to like keep yourself in some kind of academic position while you apply for jobs. I think the one exception there might be if you went into industry for a pretty long time and then started applying to academic jobs. I only know a few people who've tried to do that, but I think they have found it difficult to find academic jobs after that.
Any other last thoughts? We have like 2 minutes left. Jen, do you want to add anything before we close?
I feel like I did, and now I'm totally blanking.
Okay.
I do kind of want to go back to what Morgan said, because I think she and I, as women, had very different differences or different experiences. So no one ever asked me about my family, but I was not pregnant. Well, they didn't know I was pregnant, and I wasn't breastfeeding. And I definitely feel like if I was interviewing this year, it would be a very different story, because like she said, I think you have to reveal, I would have to ask for pumping breaks, and like it definitely feels like it puts you in a very vulnerable position to have to ask for those things, rather than, like she said, I think the Zoom definitely kind of levels the playing field a little bit. I have no solution to that, but I also will say that I kind of waited for a while to have a baby because of the academic job market. And then I wound up having a baby, probably what is arguably the worst possible time to have a baby. And I would say that, like, I don't regret having a baby when I had a baby, and I wish I would have just done it when I wanted to do it. And you deal with the consequences, and like whatever those might be, that's totally random. And perhaps unsolicited personal advice, but I would say, you know, having a baby at a bad time still worked out totally, or a bad time still worked out totally fine for me.
Wow, this was great. You guys were so open and supportive. I think these could all really benefit everyone. Mauricio, do you want to add one last thing before?
Yeah, we can add one last thing that I forgot mentioning before. And now that I see the question from Drew, and I think like just the answer to that question, if a position, like there's like any kind of bias against like people that have already held like an assistant professor position or research position, I think this like kind of goes back to like what Samer was saying, is that it is just like whether the stars align or not. There's a lot of things that go into, you know, the level of the position that like a university is looking into hiring, and like that like has to do with, you know, like if they're considering the possibility of hiring somebody as an associate, or like associate without tenure or with tenure or whatever, you know, the source of the startup funds. There's so many things that go into that I don't think there is just like a kind of blanket like negative impact that can have. So what I would say is like a lot of the applications like this is not like necessarily like a blind game in which you see an ad and then you just like shoot an application out of the blue and see if it works. So don't hesitate to send an email to like the person that is identified as the chair of the search committee to ask these questions if you have any of them, or like, hey, like, look, this is my profile. I'm like thinking about like sending an application to this position, and seek their advice. At the end of the day, the search chairs are there to try to get the best candidate possible. So they will be, you know, willing to help and like give you any advice to make you a successful candidate. So I would not hesitate to ask questions about any of these, like both, you know, like research fit, teaching fit, or like technicalities about the level at which they are hiring.
Yeah. Thank you so much, everyone, for sharing your experiences. It's been recorded, and also the chat will be available for everyone because there's a lot of really great information in there. So thank you, thank you, thank you. That was really great. I wish I had seen this panel when I was looking all those 30 years ago. So thanks very much, and take care, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Bye. Cheers.